something witty. What is up, guys? So today we are going to be taking another deep dive into another Pokemon that it's kind of been requested quite a bit, but it's one of those that kind of is flying under the radar, which could end up meaning good things for it, and it could end up meaning bad things for it. There's probably a reason why people aren't looking at it, but if there isn't, then... So today we're going to be looking at Shelgon, which is a pure dragon type Pokemon. Considering that we're going to have a Bagon Community Day coming up really soon, it would be a really good chance to actually snag a high level Bagon that you can evolve into a decent Shelgon here. So at level 40 with 15s across the board, you can max out your CP at 2031, which is great. Now you can achieve a 1499 here at level 28 if you have a 1 on attack, 15 defense, and 14 stamina there. So according to all of the math and the spreadsheets that I have, Shelgon actually ranks pretty middle of the road here. So 44th in bulk and 39th in stat product. Kinda I mean, out of like 116 some odd participants, you kinda have... it's a little better than middle of the road, but still not like amazing. So he's not got too much going for him on the top half of our board here. But that doesn't say that his moves here aren't what's actually keeping him going. So let's actually move into these. So the fast moves here, Dragon Breath and Ember. Of course, Dragon Breath just ends up being the better move here. It does the same amount of energy gain as Ember, but it ends up having 1 more damage per turn. So plus, Dragon Breath ends up hitting quite a bit of the meta for super effective damage or neutral damage, where Ember here would hit certain pieces of the meta for super effective, but it would be resisted by others. So, kinda, yeah. Dragon Breath, definitely the one you want to go there. Now, as far as charge moves go, we have Flamethrower, which is our only non-stab candidate here, costing 55 energy for 90 damage at a 1.64 damage per energy ratio. Dragon Pulse here, costing 60 for 90 damage with a 1.5 damage per energy ratio. And last but not least, we actually have Twister here, costing 45 for an even 45 damage at a 1.0 damage per energy ratio. I think that's probably the worst move ratio-wise that we've ever looked at on a deep dive. Funny enough though, it's definitely the moveset that I would go with. I personally found that Dragon Breath, Twister, and Flamethrower end up doing the best amount of coverage as far as winning the most matches in the Kingdom Cup here. If we take a look at our shield usage here, so in a scenario where I have no shields and my opponent has no shields, so basically as a closing type scenario, you actually end up winning 53.8% of matchups. The next scenario is a 2 shields for me versus 0 shields for my opponent. We end up with 98.7% of matches won. So the reason that I run this sim is to kind of figure out which Pokemon are just going to flat out beat us no matter what. And there's only one Pokemon that actually flat out beats us no matter how many shields we have, and that's Dugong. Very interesting. I was not expecting Dugong to be there. I figured maybe like Glalie or possibly Frostlass or, you know, maybe Lapras, you know, one of the kings, but Dugong. Dugong is the one you want to watch out for if you have shield advantage. Our next scenario is 0 shields versus 2 shields. We actually end up winning 7.7% of those matches. So the reason that we run this scenario is to kind of figure out what we just can end up beating flat out. There are several Pokemon that we can beat, but some notable ones that I found were like Salamence and even Sunny Castform. We actually end up beating it no matter how many shields they have. There were a couple of other ones, but they're non-meta relevant like Ponyta and stuff like that that we just didn't need to talk about. Last scenario here in a 2 shields versus 2 shields situation. So if you would, a opening or a lead-off Pokemon type situation, we actually end up winning 57.7% of our matches. So what does all that tell you? Well, it kind of tells me that Shelgon really does do a lot better with shield advantage, as most Pokemon will, but you end up having a better lead-off situation than you do a closing situation. But considering that we only win 57.7% of our matchups, it's not really like a secure lead. Something like Lapras would be a lot more secure, but in our scenario with Shelgon, he's kind of like, not impressive, but not disappointing, I guess. Now let's actually move on to some matchups here. So in every deep dive, I end up taking our subject Pokemon and I put them up against the top 10 bulkiest Pokemon in the cup. Today, you can shoot me, it's 11. So we actually end up losing to Bastiodon, Lapras, Registeel, Skarmory, Torkoal, Probopass, Steelix, Dugong, and Altaria. Ouch. Pretty bad there. So we end up losing to the top, like, 9 of those bulkiest Pokemon we just end up falling to. Now, we actually do end up winning against both Regice and Forretress, so I guess that's something to brag about. Not really. Now, moving on to our counters here. So what should we actually be focusing our efforts on whenever we use our Shelgon, and what should we actually be putting on our team to combat Shelgon if we feel like Shelgon is going to be a threat? Well, as far as what we should actually use against Shelgon, basically you can use things that are heavy on ice attacks, like Alolan Ninetales, Frostlass, Piloswine, and Mamoswine do really well against him. Things that just exploit that ice type weakness from the dragon typing that we carry here ends up doing really, really bad for us. Now, as well, you have to really worry about the Kings. We don't end up beating Lucario, Bastiodon, or Lapras with 0 shields versus 0 shields. So in a straight up like 1v1 situation, all out, no shields versus no shields, we can't beat any of the Kings. So that sucks. Lastly here, I really think that you need to pay attention to some steel types like Aggron, Metagross, and Scizor. All end up being able to push quite a bit of neutral damage to Shelgon here and can actually give him a hard time. Now on the flip side here, what things should you actually be targeting with Shelgon? Well, you can actually target a lot of the fire types. So being that we're dragon type, we do resist quite a few of the elemental typings. And fire types are one of those that really have a hard time beating Shelgon down. Things like Combuskin, Infernape, and Arcanine all have a really hard time getting into our Shelgon Fortress here. I love Shelgon's little like design where it's you also can really target some of the dragon types in the cup, like Salamence, Flygon, and Kingdra all end up losing to our Shelgon here, but you have to remember Altaria can beat you in a no shield situation, so you kind of have to be scared of Altaria there. Last but not least here, so we're going to go over some pros and cons. Let's start with our cons first. So our first negative thing that we have to say about Shelgon is it doesn't do well up against the Kings. Considering that we have the 3 Kings that we need to fight in this meta, and basically because the 3 Kings make up the meta, it's really, really difficult to actually overcome those with Shelgon. Considering that we don't beat a single one of them in an even playing field, I'm not a big fan of that. It kind of makes Shelgon a hard pick for me. I don't know if I really want to put somebody on there that doesn't necessarily get any of the Kings out of my way. Our next con is that Shelgon has some really awkward matchups. So he wins against pretty much 50% of the meta, but he loses to pretty much 50% of the meta. So he's kind of in the middle. Being that he's like a 50-50, it really makes him a really awkward pick depending on his matchups. Some of them, like I've talked about, the fire and the dragons, you can do well in, but things that have ice and steel, they just kind of end up being really awkward. So I'm not real sold on Shelgon even based on his matchups. And our last con here is that Shelgon does end up beating quite a few of the dragons, but if you're gonna beat a few of the dragons, why not just go Altaria? It just would make some more sense personally. But in a scenario where you don't have access to Altaria or possibly can't obtain one, then Shelgon actually could be a decent substitute for you. It's not as good as Altaria. Do not try to understand that as what I'm trying to say. All I'm trying to say is that Shelgon could be a decent substitute if you can't get Altaria. It could be considered the budget Altaria, if you will. But even then, Alteria's second move is super cheap, so if you can't evolve into Altaria, this could end up being cheaper on candy and a lot easier to obtain. I don't know. It's a substitute for Altaria, but it's not a great substitute, if that makes any sense. Next, let's actually move over to our pros here. So our first pro is this: we actually have some pretty nice moves here. Having access to Dragon Breath is really intriguing. Having access to Twister, I saw this number, this 1.0 damage per energy, and I was kind of like, ugh, that sounds horrible. But after looking a little bit more into it, it does make quite a bit of sense to have this on Shelgon as kind of his big like shield busting move. Like, he can whip out some crazy twisters if he can get to them. I mean, 3 energy per turn for 45 energy, that's, you know what? That's like 7 or 8 seconds that it's going to take you to get to our twister here. So not too bad. And along the way, you're going to be doing tons of damage there. That's insane. So definitely consider Twister as a shield busting move. And if you have the dust and the candies to actually unlock the second move, Flamethrower does a lot better in this meta, considering that you already have a dragon type move if you go with Twister. Flamethrower will actually hit those ice types that end up giving you some trouble, so not too bad of a trade-off. Our next pro is that he actually kind of keeps fire in check. So with the pure dragon typing, being that we can resist some fire damage, it's kind of weird because even though we're kind of like a fire-based sub-type here, kind of with our moves, we actually do keep fire pretty in check. So Dragon Breath can just push out tons of damage while being able to just overwhelm them with twisters. You can kind of resist a lot of their damage while pushing a lot of neutral damage back to them. And our last pro here is actually, I'm going to mention dragons again. So you are actually good against most of the dragons in the meta. Some of them do end up beating you, but that's because I would classify those as the top tier dragons, so to speak. So Shelgon definitely does good against what he's good at, being those fire and those dragon types, but he really has a bad weakness to the ice and the steel types in this meta. So kind of have to be wary whenever you choose Shelgon and what you actually put him up against. So that is actually all that I have for Shelgon today, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for giving me all these Pokemon to do deep dives on. I really do appreciate it. If you guys have any Pokemon that you're still looking forward to, I know that I've almost covered everything that everybody's asked for. I do have quite a few, but it's like one-offs, like random Pokemon, like really weird, obscure ones. But I'm still working through them, so if you still have any Pokemon that you're looking forward to seeing, please let me know down in those comments below. I'll put it in the spreadsheet and get to it as soon as I possibly can. So thank you guys so much for those. If you like to like videos, make sure you do that. If you don't, you can be that guy. Otherwise, let me know what you have to say down in those comments below. And until our next video, I will catch you then.